Hello, everybody, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Soda,
And I'm Kale Mary.
and this month we're going to talk about the McSpirk pairing. But this time it will be in the context of the Kelvin Timeline movies, or the alternative original series, that's also known the AOS movies.
Yep, that's exactly right. So, Soda, now that you have caught up with the Abramsverse, um, I think this makes for a really good topic of conversation simply because the dynamics, or kind of what we glean from the three movies known as the what we call the AOS verse. Um, First off, there's not a lot of content to go on. Just three
Yeah,
movies,
that's
right?
true.
But it feels like some of the dynamics in the pairings are just different than what we're used to with the original series.
That's true, and also I think it's very interesting because, first of all, I think it's very obvious that the shipping cultures around the new movies basically woke up the original series fandom. Um, like the original Star Trek fans never really died out. They are always around. It's a never-ending fandom basically. But there was a lot less activity before the movies came out, and it kind of uh, introduced new people to the franchise as a whole. And I think a lot of fans of this various pairings in the new movies kind of went back and took a little content from the original series too, to put where there was none in the new movies.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we could spend all day talking about the Jim Kirk Tarsus 4 situation and from
Yeah,
the original series, and how beloved that is for Jim Kirk of the Abramsverse without any allusion to it ever happening.
I mean, even in the original series, it was only just one episode and then never brought up again. So yeah, I can see why.
So we're going to start with Spirk.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things to me because let's just say that before we skip to, I don't want to skip to another pairing, but from the new movies, from the original series, this was the big pairing, the one that started the whole slash shipping movement. You know, kind of the birth of a new age in fandom, if you want. But in the new movies, this isn't the most popular pairing to come out of the movies.
Not at all. And
Yeah,
in fact, I sort of get the feeling that when they were recreating this universe, making the reboot universe, obviously they went into the first movie with the goal of, well, we have to have the original crew together by the
yeah,
end of the movie. And yet they left it at such a, like, very newfound starting point for, this whole crew coming together that you could honestly say that Kirk and Spock didn't even like each other.
yeah.
Whereas
That's true.
in the original series, you may have, Captain Kirk on like his first year captaining the Enterprise, but you don't get that sense of like tension or really dislike of each other that you do with Kirk and Spock. And that's the start.
Yeah,
That's like right out of the
but
gate. Let's make it a more of an antagonistic relationship where they just don't understand each other and aren't willing to listen to each other's point of views. What a foot to start on.
yeah, that's very true. Their dynamics are completely different. Well, a lot of things are different in this new universe, but I think it has to do with also the professionalism. At the start of the series, even when Kirk and Spock didn't really know each other, there was kind of like this professional respect sort of airs around them. And these new Kirk and Spock just don't have that. Even that they don't have, like, at all. Because they shouldn't have, because Kirk isn't a professional; he's a student who suddenly got the job.
And well, I mean, the first time Spock and Kirk actually meet each other seems to be when Spock is basically calling him on the carpet for cheating on the Kobayashi Maru test. So, I mean, right there, they're already arguing in a public, like almost trial.
Yeah.
They clearly don't see eye to eye even then. So Kirk actually sees Spock as his as someone who's like persecuting him for trying to break the rules. And Spock obviously sees Kirk as someone who has broken the rules and has no respect for the institution.
Yeah, and it's a very choice because there was an antagonistic relationship in the original series. It just wasn't between Kirk and Spock. So to take this kind of dynamic and just put it on Kirk and Spock is an interesting choice. I'm not exactly sure why they chose to do it, but it's an interesting choice.
Let's talk about how long it takes to undo it.
I think right up until the last 15 minutes of the second movie.
Exactly.
Something like that.
I think. I mean, that's pretty much it. So in Into Darkness, Kirk and Spock, okay, maybe they have some respect for each other by that point. You could probably say that, but they don't have a close type of friendship because they're not even sure that each other knows that they individually think they work well together as a team. It's very awkward, actually.
Yeah.
So, and then, there's that whole, point in the first part of the movie where Kirk is like, I thought you were my friend, because Spock reports him for, of course, breaking the rules. And then, I guess that's the running theme through the movie is, do they really accept each other as friends? And with what happens to Kirk and Spock, I guess, going off the rails over it, I guess we are to assume by those last 15 minutes that, oh yeah, okay, they are friends.
Yeah, it was a very weird choice to have them suddenly. Well, it's not that they have them be friends even, it's just that Kirk suddenly is, oh, we thought we were friends. Like, based on what? Based on what did you think that? We are never told, because you never act like friends. Up until the last 15 minutes.
I kind of feel like Kirk thinks he's the guy that is friends with everybody. Unless, of course, that person is just really, pisses him off.
Maybe. I mean, maybe.
I mean, he probably sees himself as, I'm the friendly guy. Of course you're my friend.
Yeah, maybe.
It actually makes me question whether he wants to be friends with his crewmen as opposed to being seen as their captain and the authority figure they obey without question. I don't know. It's a little interesting.
It is. Kirk is very... I have a lot of issues with new movies, Kirk. I won't get into all of them right here.
Right, as a leader, yeah.
Yeah. As a leader, as a captain, I mean, it's very unclear what they wanted to make of his character in general. It keeps changing according to the plot, basically.
And so when we get into Beyond, right, we just kind of come into the movie assuming that they're great friends. We're supposed to assume that they're just everything. They're just a great team. They know they're a great team. They rely on each other. I think we as the audience should look at them as very, very close to having the same dynamic as the original series counterparts. Yeah. But at times I still question it.
Look, I think it's very clear this was the screenwriter's intention, but it didn't come through because, as I said, it just, in movies you're supposed to show, not tell, and we were told, but we're not shown.
Well, right, because they weren't to that point with the previous movie, and I know we have a time skip. Supposedly they've been out there for 3 years. in close quarters with everyone. Kirk talks about relationships being made and broken and that sort of thing. Like, to your point, they're just telling us, oh, everybody's at this really great point in their relationship. What? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't make me happy as a person who likes Kirk, Spock, and McCoy as the triumvirate and likes to think that they are to the point where they work well as a triad, but I also, like you, sometimes it's like a hard pill to swallow when you don't know how they got there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's, I want them to be friends, but I also kind of want to see the way they become friends in this universe. Like,
Yeah.
I felt that was missing. It really did miss. It was missing for me.
So with Spirk, what do you feel fans of Spirk think?
I mean, in the new movies fandom, it's not the most popular ship, but it is still a popular ship. I think every combination of McSpirk is popular in the new movies, basically. But I think, surprisingly enough, out of the three, it's the least popular ship. And I also think a part of it is due to people not really connecting with new Spock. I think in the original series, Spock was kind of the breakout character. Like, everybody loved Spock. Spock was almost the star of the show as far as fans are concerned. But in the new movies, Spock didn't get this kind of like love.
It's very true. He's not like the original series counterpart. He's sort of a new animal. He's shaped. I mean, you could obviously argue he's shaped by trauma, just like everyone else. But
Yeah.
we kind of come into the first movie already knowing that he's more human than his original series counterpart, simply because, I mean, he's already in a relationship with someone, right? He's in a relationship with Uhura, and he already appears a little more emotional than you would
Exactly.
than you might have thought he would be being introduced to his character.
Exactly.
So,
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, he has moments where he's emotionally compromised in the first movie. He has moments where he's emotionally compromised in the second movie. And then I don't really know how to describe him in the third movie other than sassy, which I appreciate. There's a place for being sassy. I think we all love that about Spock's character, but he's just he's not the kind of sassy that his counterpart is.
Yeah, he doesn't really emit the same. In the original series, when Spock became emotionally compromised, it was like a big thing because he usually isn't like that.
Right.
But in the movies, he keeps, and like you pointed out, he keeps being emotionally compromised, so it doesn't feel like it's out of the ordinary. He's just emotionally compromised again. That's what he does.
And then add to the fact that he's also physically affectionate in public with Uhura. Now, it's not like he's all over her, they're all over each other, but it's almost shocking to see him, what shocks Kirk, right? To see him kiss his girlfriend in public. I mean, it's sort of like not even they understand how Spock, as a Vulcan, would be comfortable doing that. And obviously, we don't really see his counterpart doing that unless he's been brainwashed or given happy spores or, that's just, he's so much more reserved, the counterpart is,
exactly.
As opposed to AOS Spock. AOS Spock does not have those types of taboos, it seems, the same kind of taboos. But, we could attribute that to Uhura and his relationship, the influence of that. However,
which kind of raises the question. For me, it raises the question of how they got together in the first place.
I will tell you, my headcanon is she just walked up to him and said, "You're going to date me."
I mean, it could be. It's as likely as anything.
Right, like she gave him a very logical, rational argument for why they should date, and he just accepted it. Exactly like she does with why he should, assign her to the Enterprise. um, when she doesn't appear
Yeah.
to be on that roster when they head out to fight Nero. So
Yeah, it could be.
that's my personal headcanon though. You what this begs the question is like what does that more emotional, less reserved Spock bring to a relationship with Kirk that you probably wouldn't see in TOS?
Well, I think it's more of well, in AOS, I think Spirk, original Spirk is very, very sweet. I would say very, kind of friends to lovers. They know each other in and out. They support each other and all this stuff. AOS is more like not exactly enemies to lovers, but kind of this dynamic. Like they are opposite attract sort
Yeah.
of dynamic. If you like, couples that fight hard and then make up and this sort of stuff, it seems to me this is kind of the dynamic. But I will say that of the few AOS perk feats I read, it seems like the writers took their cues from TOS rather than the characterization that you're shown in the movies.
Right.
I don't see a lot of like fighting and opposite attract and like a lot of arguing, which I think is supposed to be if the characters are true to the movies, but they act more like original series Spock and Kirk than movie Spock and Kirk.
It's that
I say
whole
right.
like are they really, like soulmates kind of thing, right? Like they
Yeah,
see each other,
yeah,
they're like the star-crossed lovers, soulmates, whatever. They, have some reasons that they might not should be together, but then they're together anyway. And a lot of people think like Kirk and Spock are like the example of the perfect couple.
yeah,
And it's kind of hard to imagine that that perfect couple scenario works in Abramsverse because of the fact that
exactly.
they don't, like you said, it's like an enemies to lovers or enemies to friends to lovers type relationship. Like they don't even like each other when they
Yeah,
first meet.
and it's not just that they don't like. It's not just that they don't like each other. It's just that they seem to be like on opposite sides on anything.
Yeah.
Kirk is very impulsive, and Spock is supposed to be very calculated. And Kirk likes to just go in, and Spock likes to wait a little. Like they have a lot of like
Polar opposite.
opposite. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Like
polar
opposite
opposite
instincts,
traits.
opposite instincts.
I mean, and it's like to your point, Soda, they don't really respect each other to start out, so they're not even trying to listen to the other's position in order to work together. It's like they can't work together is kind of the point. So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So, like you said, it doesn't really work that well with the concept of them being soulmates and destined to be together forever in every universe. Um,
yeah.
it really doesn't, yeah, it doesn't seem that way. So I understand why the fans of the ship,
Maybe that's why Spirk is. I mean, like you're trying to say, like Spirk is still popular in Abramsverse because it is such an iconic pairing from the original series. People want to. They just want to have that iconic pairing no matter what. They do want to. They've already like probably convinced themselves it will be something that is exist in every universe, including reboot universe. No matter
hmm
what.
exactly. I think a lot of people just, either they, I don't think most of them knew about the Original Series first because Fitch did bring in a lot of new fans, but you know, Spirk is really so ubiquitous. It's
Yeah.
everybody knows it's kind of the beginning of slash fan fiction. So people just kind of drew inspiration from what they saw of the original series and kind of drafted on the new actors of the new movies.
Yeah. So looking at this pairing based on the characterizations of Abrams' verse, what do they actually have going for them in terms of a relationship?
Well, like I said, if you like a relationship with a lot of conflict and a lot of emotion and a lot of heat, like they constantly argue, and they constantly fight, but then they come back and work together, so they make up, and it's a very passionate relationship. If you like that, then it's a great pairing for you.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's actually probably would be a very passionate relationship. It also makes me think of when Kirk says in Beyond, like, what would I do without you? That it's something, if they had a relationship, it's something they would both fight for. Because it does take so much for them to be together, going against some of maybe their polar opposite type personalities, that because they do have to work for the relationship, it's all that more precious.
Yes, but on the other hand, I'm not so sure it would be such a stable relationship.
Yeah, true.
Personally, yeah, I don't, if we're based only off of the characterization we saw in the movies, I'm not even sure they would last if they were together.
Well, we have to set
Because
Playboy
they're,
Kirk aside for a second.
well,
But
yeah. I mean, I didn't even take that into account, but just because of how, conflicting they are, and like they probably have completely different goals in life. Like, how can they even make a life together?
true, very true.
Yeah. So that's why I think it might be a very rocky and a very, passionate but rocky and, very heated, but also not a very long relationship.
Well, like you said, of the ones that are popular and, like, I guess between the Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, like Spirk is probably. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think it is like second most popular, but sometimes I think it's third most popular. Kind of depends on who you talk to at any point in time.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you, and I actually think it's third. I really do because, as I said, I think. Well, if I think I know where you're going. If you're talking about the next band we should talk about, there was a breakout character in the movies, and it wasn't Spock. So apparently, without the breakout character, it also wasn't Kirk.
Yep. So, but that being said, Spirk is definitely not the number one pairing that got people hot and bothered and excited.
Yeah,
And that
very
was
much so.
obviously McKirk,
Yeah,
Kirk and McCoy.
yeah. McCoy is the breakout character of the new movie. Everybody loved him. Like, I think I've never. I honestly think there weren't that many McCoy fans until the movies, and suddenly everybody started loving McCoy both from the new movies and the original series.
Yep. McCoy doesn't have that many lines.
Yeah,
So,
maybe that's the key. Just the script didn't ruin him.
but also some of his lines, especially in the first two movies, are just like ridiculous, like Southern colloquialisms that not even I, as a Southerner, would say. So they're so
Well, maybe future
stereotypical
space Southerners would say that.
and silly. It just truly made me laugh. So McCoy is the breakout character. And in fact, he shows up in the very beginning of the first movie, and he's the first one that Kirk meets of the
Yeah,
original series crew. So, and then when we kind of do a small time skip, Academy years, it is pretty much inferred that Kirk and McCoy have been like either
best
roommates
friend.
or best friends for the span of like 3 years or however long they've been in the academy. So there is
Yeah,
we're coming into the development of the original crew with Kirk and McCoy being best friends.
yeah, and that is actually kind of true to the original series because in the original series, Kirk and McCoy also knew each other before Kirk became captain of the Enterprise. But it's part of the thing that I talked about the fans of the new movies kind of mixing up the both the canons, and I see a lot of like original series fans kind of adopting the headcanon that maybe Kirk and McCoy in that universe also maybe were roommates for a while or landed the academy together or something like that.
I will say, I think when you go into the first season, you obviously do know that like Kirk and McCoy have known each other for a long time. They consider themselves friends, but it's kind of low
Yeah.
key, right? It's not like what I'm trying to say is the tightness between them as friends. It doesn't seem like they're attached at the hip at the way kind of Kirk and McCoy are in Abramsverse. And I don't know if that's simply because it seems like McCoy is following Kirk around everywhere and doing his darndest to, make sure Kirk lives through the day.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that original series Kirk is a little more responsible than
Yeah,
new Kirk,
true.
so he doesn't need a nanny. But there was kind of a subtle. I guess maybe it's also part of the time where it was produced. There was subtle closeness between Kirk and McCoy. In the first few episodes, especially, McCoy was kind of like Kirk's confidant. He
Yeah.
came to ask advice of him a lot of times. They drank together. They had lunch together. They really spent a lot of time together. Not on the jobs.
Yeah.
Kirk is both of them are always on the job, but kind of they had like they talked about things that aren't always related.
Yeah, the one thing I loved about Kirk and McCoy in the original series is because, clearly they were friends, but they had a respect for each other when it came to the job. And so they knew how, they were mature enough that they could make that transition, being professionals and a captain, captain and CMO, superior, and the report, that they could make that transition when they had to. And it's not like you couldn't see that they were still friends when they were doing that, but there were times where they set that friendship aside in order to like butt heads a little bit. So I just thought that said that
Yeah.
they had great respect for each other and who they were outside of just being friends. It's almost like McCoy in the reboot verse sometimes balks at the fact that Kirk is suddenly in charge. Like, who put this guy in charge? Like, he's my best buddy, but
Yeah.
even I wouldn't take orders from him.
Yeah, and I mean, Spock is also like that, and they're both very justified because, just a moment ago, Kirk was a cadet, so
Yeah.
who put him in charge?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I think as an audience, we can also see that Kirk is not very professional, so it's only natural that people would balk at him being in charge and telling them what to do.
True.
Um,
And yet, people just love that closeness between Kirk and McCoy, in the Abrams verse. It's like people just see them holding hands or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's because you get the feeling that McCoy is very devoted to Kirk
Yeah.
in the movies,
Yeah.
like very, very, very invested in his well-being,
Yeah.
um, which I think a lot of people gravitate towards. Um, so I think that's what people really like about it, like sort of devotion, how much care they show. Mostly McCoy shows Kirk, I think.
Well, right. I mean, McCoy actually breaks the rules in order to put Kirk on that vessel on the Enterprise when Kirk shouldn't even be there. Um, he just takes.
Yeah.
It's like you remember how he turns and starts to walk away, and he knows how despondent Kirk is, that Kirk is grounded and can't go with them. He just turns around, and it's like you just see that instant he decides he's just gonna, to hell with it. He's just gonna make sure that Kirk comes with him because that's what his buddy wants. Like, that matters more than the whole regulation book of Starfleet. What? I mean, wow.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm just trying to picture now, like, TOS McCoy trying to sneak Kirk on, onto a vessel. I mean, like, in the later years, absolutely. They sneak each other into every kind of place, but
yeah. In the original series, I get the feeling that McCoy was more of a general rule breaker for fun than Kirk was.
Right.
Kirk break the rules, but you only break them out of like moral and professional obligation. McCoy is like, no, he just breaks rules for fun. McCoy would break rules for fun.
Whereas, I mean, that's a good point because it kind of seems like for McCoy and Abramsverse, it goes against the grain for him to do that, but he's willing to take that risk because it is Kirk, and obviously that goes a long way towards them having a very good relationship.
Yeah. I think in the Abramsverse, it's like, because Abramsverse Kirk is so irresponsible, McCoy has to become more responsible to make up for it, because you can't just have a couple of dumbasses running around the ship doing whatever they want.
I mean, you could, but yeah.
Yeah, but you won't get anywhere.
And you know what's funny is,
So yeah,
at the end of the first movie, Spock is the one that Kirk is not certain will join his crew, but it's almost like probably the first person Kirk would think would take a position with him would be McCoy. It's almost like you would get the feeling that Kirk never doubted the fact that McCoy would accept an assignment reporting to him.
yeah,
Like, oh, we're best buddies. We're going to be together forever, sailing through the universe on my ship. But I'm not sure about that Vulcan guy over there. You think he'll join us if I ask?
that's really true.
So yeah, they kind of are a troublemaking duo if you think about it. Probably the admirals at the academy just like saw McCoy and Kirk together and thought, well, McCoy's not so bad, but when he's with Kirk, it's a lost cause.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, there is a lot of emotion on McCoy's side. You do see how deeply he cares for Kirk, what he's willing to do on Kirk's behalf. Obviously, he's emotional when Kirk is in trouble in the second movie. He's willing to like almost break his his medical code, like the code of honor, to bring Kirk back. And
Yeah,
I don't think it's ever really a question that Kirk and McCoy stay close throughout all three movies. So
yeah.
if there's any room to have a pairing that has any chance of staying together for a very long time and being happy, it's probably Kirk and McCoy, simply because McCoy knows what he's getting into. He's known it for a long time, and he's made the choice to stick around.
Exactly.
Come hell or high water, and no matter what Kirk is up to.
It's interesting. I think the thing that draws a lot of fans to McKirk in new movies is the same thing that drew a lot of fans to Spirk in the original series. This devotion, this kind of they're on the same wave. There's just the real sense that they're very good friends, that they respect each other, and that they'll last together for a long time.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like McKirk is the Spirk of of the Abramsverse.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was certainly, I remember when I joined the fandom in probably 2010, it had been about almost a year, I think, since the first movie had come out. And I was like, well, I know about Star Trek. I knew about Spirk, even if I wasn't, like quite a fan at the time. The first thing I did was go like, well, where are the Spirk shippers? And, obviously they were there, but they were not nearly as loud and as present as the McKirk shippers. And of course, I had just seen the movie, so I obviously knew why people love McKirk, because I was like, wow, these guys are best buddies. That's pretty cool. Of course they like each other. How could they not?
Yeah, it makes sense to me why these two are the breakout ship.
Yeah, and it only adds fuel to the fire and like Into Darkness. Do you remember when McCoy gets his arm stuck in the torpedo? And Kirk looks like he's literally going to pass out on the bridge at the thought of McCoy getting blown up. I'm pretty sure it wasn't because of Carol.
Yeah.
And just like his like instant relief that McCoy didn't die. But I mean, and then you come into Beyond, and what do we have in the first scene but Kirk and McCoy sharing a drink in honor of his upcoming birthday?
Yeah. Exactly.
Kirk tells McCoy things that he probably tells no one else. They have that. They still have that confidence. Each other's confidant, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like you see that closeness that you pretty much assume they had in the first movie, that devotion for McCoy is then later reflected in Kirk. Like Kirk has a similar kind of attachment to McCoy. So,
Yeah.
there's no
That's
way
true.
that McKirk would become a less popular ship after the next two movies. I think
Yeah.
it's still as strong as it was since 2009.
Yeah. And apart from character backgrounds itself, like because McCoy wasn't a really he was more present in the original series than he was in the new movies. Yeah. But because he wasn't as big of a character, even in the original series, there wasn't a lot of information about him, and there wasn't a lot of McKirk shipping going on. There was barely any, actually. Um, so it's actually interesting in the sense that the original series doesn't really influence it, unlike the Spirk shipping. Um, a lot of it is just what we are shown in the new movies.
But you know what's also ironic about that soda? It's still the same kind of trope, best friends to lovers in both
Yeah,
series.
that's true. That's true.
So one doesn't influence the other, but they still have the same kind of dynamic in both series. It is. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, I have seen more original series McKirk coming up as a result of the new movies,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Do you think at all it's because
Mhm.
Kirk and Spock were sort of antagonistic to each other in the first movie that maybe people who thought they would go in shipping Kirk and Spock then defaulted to Kirk McCoy?
I just kind of think that there just wasn't a lot of shipping material to hang on to in Spirk in the new movies. Just people ship everything, so that doesn't stop them. But you can see that in pairings that there are more fuel, there are more shippers, and
Mm-hmm.
there just wasn't a lot in Spirk and Kirk, in Spirk in the new movies. They were antagonistic. Spock had a girlfriend. Spock also wasn't a really popular character, so people I can see why people gravitated toward McKirk.
I mean, it was there. It was like there and obvious and in your face. And if you're going to ship anyone with Kirk, the best candidate would be McCoy based on
Exactly.
the script of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. And I have heard theories that Spock and Kirk were intentionally made like rivals, and Spock was intentionally given a girlfriend because the director and the script and the producers didn't want people to ship Kirk and Spock for some reason.
I
Um,
don't understand that, Soto, because why would you not want the most famous pairing to be bringing in viewers?
yeah, and even if it's true, it kind of backfired greatly.
Yeah.
Immediately backfired. Like
Yeah.
shippers are not to be deterred.
I mean, yeah, let's be honest, like your shippers keep your they keep the fandom alive
Yeah, that's
for the
true.
most part.
Shippers.
Yeah, anyway. Well, shall we move on?
Okay, and the third pairing, which is second place in the original series and in the new movies, Spones.
I don't even know where to start with this one. Well, we did mention McCoy doesn't have a lot of lines. But of the
Yeah,
lines that McCoy has, if he's not talking to Kirk, he's probably saying something snarky to Spock. I
yeah,
mean, obviously, that is just probably like the second most popular thing about the original series, besides Spirk, is the fact
yeah.
that Spock and McCoy fight with each other. Like, people love that. Their banter
Exactly. That's legendary.
is as legendary as Spirk. So of course they need to have that same banter in the Abramsverse. And so I can see why Spones is kind of like an unchanged little niche pairing that people love because they didn't change that aspect of their relationship at all. I mean, it's barely there, but it's still, what is there is still
Yeah,
the same to the original series.
exactly. It's the one dynamic that I think really didn't change at all. They have basically the same interactions.
Yeah.
As you said, very few interactions, but those that are there, it's basically the same. I think it feels a little less mean spirited than Spirk in the new movies, which is I think quite slightly more popular. But it's very much the same, I guess. You know, in the original series, you kind of get the sense they have more respect for each other, more professional respect, even if they don't really say it. It's kind of their thing not to say it, to pretend it isn't there. But we know, and Kirk also knows that it's there. In the new movies, because they're so new to everything, there isn't that thing yet.
Yeah.
But
And then
uh,
again, in the third movie, they have to spell it out for us,
yeah,
right?
exactly,
And
exactly.
they purposely pair McCoy and Spock together. I mean, you should. I mean, again, that banter is legendary. It's something that makes people laugh and, keeps people entertained. Um,
Yeah,
but then they also have some very, I'll say, touching moments between Spock and McCoy as they go through their journey together, isolated from everyone else. And Spock even says that he respects McCoy to his face. Like, he says that. I'm trying to
yeah,
think of when Spock says that to McCoy in the original series. Oh wait, he doesn't.
yeah.
So,
Um,
but to your point, he
yeah,
doesn't have to say it. So,
exactly, because we kind of get it,
yeah, we get it.
by there. But yeah, it makes sense that they have to spell it out in the new movie. Um, but yeah, I don't think I have a lot to say about it because, first of all, there is so little interaction there, and what is so similar to the original series.
Well, I do want to ask you, how do you think McCoy feels kind of being caught in the middle between Kirk and Spock? Because in the first movie, Kirk is like, "Well, who's that Vulcan guy like trying to shame me in front of this my whole class?" Um, and then McCoy's like, "I like that guy. He's making life hard for you," which is kind of a joke. But then you
Yeah.
see immediately when Spock like throws Kirk off the ship, McCoy's not happy about that.
I mean, he didn't just throw him off the ship; he threw him off to some deserted ice planet.
Well, yeah,
So
so he
yeah,
basically stranded him on Delta Vega, like, which is kind of
yeah,
ridiculous because there's big monsters there, and it's not even anywhere near
yeah,
the station. And also, Kirk is like unconscious at the time that he sends him off. I mean, let there have been like
yeah.
some medical complications. But
It wasn't a very logical move,
yeah.
but yeah.
But what's funny is like by the time you get to the third movie, Spock and McCoy, like you see McCoy is kind of back to where he is when like he first initially got his first impression of Spock. He's kind of like, I like that guy. Like he loves to tease Spock. You could tell.
But
Like teasing Spock just probably makes his day. To your point, there's not a whole lot to say because there's not a lot of material, but I think probably the one thing that stands out to Spones fans is obviously the third movie when Spock admits that he respects McCoy, he calls him Leonard, and then later when Spock is, they're talking about the Volkaian amulet that Spock gave Uhura, and they're using that to track her so they can find where the captive crew is. Because they talk about like it being radioactive jewelry, like a tracking device. And McCoy goes, "Well, I'm sure glad he doesn't respect me." And then everybody's like, "Wait a minute! Just last scene, he was saying he respects you." It's kind of hilarious.
yeah,
But those moments are few and far in between. So you really just kind of have to do what original series fans do and go with the flow. Although I will say, I
yeah,
think if we extend to the movies, Soda, probably Spock and McCoy are way nicer to each other by the time they're in old age.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you remember, would you like to help me perform surgery on me? So, yeah.
But the good thing is, because they seem to be at that point in the third movie where they are in the original series, there is probably that potential for them to go on to be even nicer to each other, maybe sweeter with each other as they get older. So you can see why it's basically the same type. People who love it in the original series are going to like it in AOS. The potential's still there.
Exactly.
Yep. So how does that bring us to my favorite pairing, which is McSpirk?
Yeah.
So that's all three, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy together.
I think, much like it's also my favorite. Yeah, it's much like in the original series. They kind of complete one another in that sense. I actually think it's more pronounced in the new movies how much they need to complete each other, because in the new movies they kind of feel, fresh and half baked.
Yes.
Like they have a lot of development to do. In the original series, including the movies, they're like, they're older people. They are kind of settled, and in the new movies, they kind of feel like they balance each other out even more because they're not those people yet. Um, you need Spock is still kind of not very Vulcan in the sense he's prone to being emotionally compromised, um, and he needs McCoy and occasionally Kirk to kind of balance it out. And as we discussed, the Spirk, as we discussed, AOS Spirk is very volatile. So McCoy is kind of like the cool head in the middle, kind of calming both of them down, maybe bridging the gap between them.
And you know what's very interesting about that, Soda? People tend to think that sort of Kirk is the glue that binds them together in McSpirk in the original series. It's like,
Yeah.
McCoy and Spock are kind of, they banter a lot. They butt heads. They don't always see eye to eye. The one person that they both really care about, and that is sort of like the link between them, and the reason they can work together and will work together, is Kirk. Now, not to say that isn't true in Abramsverse, because obviously Spock and McCoy, they understand that Kirk is important to them both and to each other. I mean, that whole conversation in the cave and beyond where, Spock is saying he wants to leave Fleet, and McCoy's like, well, just Jim know that, because he's sure not going to like that. McCoy knows what Spock means to Kirk. Kirk and Spock understand McCoy very well. They know how he's going to react to being them deciding that he's going to be the one to go on the crazy mission. They understand each other all so well, but at the same time, to your point, the one who butt heads is Kirk and Spock. So obviously McCoy would be better suited to be kind of the person that reins them both in and makes them kind of get along and see each other's side. I don't know if that dynamic could change in the future. It kind of feels like it could flip around, but it's very much needed. I agree with you. They need each other, all three of them, to actually be well balanced.
How do you think it could flip around in the future?
I think it kind of goes back to maybe the original series. Kirk and Spock and McCoy are kind of made to follow Kirk around. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Their devotion to Kirk is really second to none. And most people in the original series think Spock is the one who's utterly devoted to Kirk. And while you come into Abramsverse and think McCoy, at least initially, is more devoted to Kirk, in the long run, they both are going to be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's
so
true. Yeah.
I think if Kirk ever matures enough to understand that Spock and McCoy will stick by him, then there'll be less need for McCoy to be the middle guy. To be the mediator. But that comes with maturity. So in my mind, the dynamic probably shifts to what it would be if they were in a very healthy relationship. And that no one really has to be the mediator for like big blow up fights, because there are no big blow up fights. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's good.
They calm with age. They learn how to have more patience with each other. I don't see it as like Kirk like flipping around to need to mediate between McCoy and Spock, because I think McCoy and Spock probably get along fine. And I think that's just something, and it's probably they both recognize that they enjoy it. So for me, it would be more like they'll be more settled than they are.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
In the beginning of the relationship, obviously, you know, you're going to have, like you said, you're going to have Kirk and Spock, like, get mad at each other. And then they're not going to want to talk to each other. And then McCoy is just going to have to be like, well, time for us to all sit down and talk about our feelings, even though none of us wants to do it. So, you know, he's going to be the one to put him in the get along t-shirt.
Yeah.
So I see that having to become less and less, probably if they had a relationship that actually became functional and healthy in the future. So that's how I see it changing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Both the original series and the new movies, Kirk is like the youngest person of the three. But in the new series, it really feels like it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just Kirk is really acting so young and rash, and he can change with maturity. I mean, the third movie he is starting to change a little. He's a little less, impulsive and whatever. But it really does make me think you're right, because it does seem like he's settling more with age. Like he's growing up and becoming more mature and less.
Well, you know who I worry about?
And less inclined to fight with. Who?
I worry about Spock, because Spock is actually pretty immature in the Abramsverse.
Yeah, that's also true.
like Kirk seems pretty young and whatnot, but at times I just think like, Spock, are you like in Vulcan age, like still in your teenage years? What's going on with your moods?
Yeah, he really does have mood swings.
So, like, is he having hormone? Like, is he just having like the preteen hormone attack? I don't know. So, and I don't necessarily get the feeling of. I mean, obviously Spock's not settled in the third movie. He's torn between doing his duty to his race versus what he really wants to do, which is stay in Starfleet.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that he has a ways to go too. And if both Kirk and Spock are gonna like, until they both become very settled with who they are and gain that wisdom that comes with having life experience, probably McCoy's gonna be like, why am I the adult in this relationship?
Yeah, exactly.
He's the old man.
Yeah.
So.
Even when he's young, he's the old man.
Yeah. Trying to think if I have anything else to add here. They very rarely give us triumvirate moments in the Abramsverse, but there are a few times. Yeah. There's that point in Into Darkness where Kirk wants the advice of both Spock and McCoy. Yeah. You see that classic, that kind of like iconic scene where Kirk is sitting in the captain's chair and you've got Spock and McCoy on either side. And then, of course, in Beyond, you have that sort of that end scene where you've got Spock and McCoy at either elbow of Kirk, and they're all just kind of looking forward to the future together. So
exactly, that's really the image I thought of when you said, AOS McSpirk moment.
Yeah. And then not to mention the fact that Kirk is thrilled to get Spock and McCoy back after they've been separated in Beyond. And of course, they're having a powwow. And who's having a powwow? It's Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, trying to figure out what they're going to do. Bouncing their concerns and their ideas off of each other. It's clear that they're actually more comfortable working together, all three of them, by the third movie.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the third movie, we know it was written by people who actually liked the original series, so
Yeah.
they took a lot more from it, and it really shows, especially in the relationship of these three.
So do you feel there's any difference between what Roddenberry envisioned in the original series with the triumvirate? You know, people like to call it what, like the heart, soul, and mind, or something like that, where you have each of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy as a sort of like a different part of your id.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Do you see that as being different in Abramsverse?
Well, I think there was a shift of roles, basically, with Kirk basically becoming the heart, with McCoy and McCoy kind of becoming the id, because, well, Kirk is so, in the new movies, Kirk is so impulsive, and his actions first, think about it later. So he's no longer the one that kind of mediates between um, both perspectives. He's just complete ease. What do you think?
I kind of agree. I think they still have the potential to be what they are in the original series. McCoy to me is still a compassionate person in Abramsverse. Spock is still like a very logical, rational person. But Kirk is the one whose characterization makes him an ill fit for being the one who can balance between the two. And obviously, that goes back to that whole conversation with Kirk being a natural leader, kind of knowing how to have elements of both in his approach and how he is a captain. So I think until Kirk learns how to be that kind of captain and leader, he's not a real fit for that role in the heart, soul, mind. Do you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
want
I
him
do.
to be, me being a McSpirk shipper and a lover of the triumvirate, like, and I think he has the potential. Obviously, they make him have potential by the third movie, but I think it's like a ways off.
Yeah, I agree.
But you know me, if I can't ship him in like the real time of the canon, then you just fast forward to the future where everything's fine.
Yeah,
Everything's fine, and Kirk has cooled his jets, and Spock has decided
and they're all alive
he,
forever.
he doesn't need to have so many mood swings, and McCoy is still McCoy. I love him no matter what.
Yeah, I completely agree. I personally, I have a lot of issues with both Spock and Kirk in the new movies.
Yeah.
I have not really gotten into shipping these characters as they are in the movies. I have to say that. But I can imagine maybe a future where they're more similar to their original series counterparts, and so it's easier to see why people would ship them then.
Yeah. Something that adds an interesting element to a part of Kirk that affects his relationships. People tend to like to think of Kirk as having abandonment issues simply because, he lost his father at a young age, and there's evidence that he went through some type of like perhaps like child abuse, with his uncle. And then of course there's that whole missing piece about, did Tarsus 4 really happen, because that would traumatize any kid. I think an element of like Kirk's personality that sometimes surfaces in the movies, but I think people definitely like to kind of hang their hat on in pairings, is Kirk feeling like he's alone and, not wanting to be left behind, or to sometimes having commitment issues because of it.
I can see but why people would say he's the
Yeah.
needy one. It makes sense with his characterization.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they actually kind of aimed for it, like
Yeah.
this generic story with the daddy issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it kind of aimed for that he has commitment issues and abandonment issues because of those daddy issues, basically. I also kind of saw this, I think, an interesting take, I think, in a lot of McSpirk original alternative series. Thinks that it's like part of the reason it works better with two people is because of those commitment issues, because it doesn't force Kirk to just commit to one person.
Yeah.
It's not as limiting.
Another thing I will add is it sort of puts Kirk in the role within the relationship of being emotionally, like, basically emotionally dependent on the other person. So sometimes you have in like Spirk or McKirk, you have like Spock or McCoy being the one who is sort of the more emotionally stable one in the relationship, who has to be the reassuring partner. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of different. I think it's just different than what you would see in the original series because, like you said, Kirk of the original series doesn't seem to have those daddy issues. Now, that's not to say that he doesn't go through the whole motion of like he has relationships that fall through because he's so ambitious and wanted to focus on his career at a time where he put his relationships aside. Also, he has terrible luck with love because his his partners seem to die shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
So, that's not to say that like Kirk of the original series doesn't probably does feel like he's going to be alone. I think some of that's where some of that came from in Beyond, where Kirk in Beyond is like lonely. It's kind of obvious he's lonely. I just feel like the way that people use that characterization in AOS is different than how they've used it in TOS. So do we have anything else to talk about?
No, I think I said everything I want to say.
All right. I just want to thank everyone for listening to our podcast today, and we'll be back with a second part to this discussion on Abramsverse relationships. Next time, we'll talk about some of the non-triumvirate pairings, like Chulu and Spahura. So, thanks everyone, and talk to you next time.
Bye.